The lecture hall of Orbital Academy Prime was filled with young cadets in dark blue uniforms. Bright lights glowed above them, and the curved windows behind the stage revealed the endless black of space with its distant stars. At the center stood Professor Elian, a man with silver hair and calm eyes. His voice carried through the hall as he spoke of the survival of civilizations. Extinction, Elian said, is far more rare than people think. Intelligent life learns to adapt, to change, to endure. History across the galaxy shows us that most species find a way to continue. They stumble, yes, but they rise again. The cadets listened with respect, though some looked unsure. They were taught to admire the strength of humanity and to believe in progress. Elian had been teaching for decades, and his words often carried hope, especially for those preparing to face the dangers of space. He pointed to the hollow display above his head. Strange alien symbols and images shifted across the air. Records of alien species who had survived wars, climate shifts, and even asteroids. Civilizations are like rivers, the professor continued. They may bend and twist, but rarely do they dry completely. Life, my students, is persistent. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then from the second row a hand rose. It belonged to Cadet Mira, a young woman with sharp eyes and a quiet but steady voice. She was not known for speaking often, but when she did, people listened. "Professor," she began, "with respect, you are wrong." The hall grew tense. Cadets turned their heads toward her, whispers passing between them. It was rare for a first-year cadet to interrupt one of Elian's lectures. But Mira stood her ground, her expression firm. "Extinction is not rare," she said clearly. "It is the rule. 99% of our species are gone." Elian's brows lifted slightly. "Explain." Mira stood, her voice carrying more strength now. "On Earth, before humanity spread to the stars, countless species lived. Dinosaurs, mammoths, birds that could no longer fly, entire forests gone. Even among humans, how many civilizations fell? How many colonies failed when we reached into space? Entire histories lost. We are the exception, not the example." The cadets shifted in their seats. Some nodded slightly. Others frowned. But none could deny that Mira's words carried weight. Elian studied her for a long moment, then smiled gently, though his eyes showed thought. "You are passionate, Cadet," he said. "But passion must not cloud truth. While many species did vanish, many also survived. You and I are proof of that. Humanity has endured every challenge it faced." Mira sat again, but her gaze did not leave him. The lecture continued, but the room was no longer the same. Every word Elian spoke carried the echo of Mira's challenge. By the end, the cadets left quietly, each lost in thought. Later that evening, Elian sat alone in his study chamber. The chamber was lined with old books, some printed on paper, others in glowing digital form. The stars outside looked close enough to touch. A knock came at his door, and when he answered, Mira stood there. "I thought you might come," Elian said, gesturing for her to enter. "I wanted to speak more," Mira admitted. She looked around at the books with quiet respect. "You are a great teacher, Professor, but I think you are too hopeful." Elian chuckled softly. "Too hopeful? That is a rare criticism." She stepped closer. "Hope is good, but if we blind ourselves with it, we may repeat the mistakes of the past. The records are clear. Extinction is not rare. It is our shadow." Elian leaned back in his chair. "And yet here you stand. Humanity has faced disasters, yes, but we have also rebuilt. Perhaps we are learning. Perhaps the shadow is not the end." Mira shook her head. "Or perhaps we are standing on the edge, pretending the ground is solid when it is already cracking." Their words hung in the air, neither willing to yield. At last, Elian sighed. "You remind me of myself when I was young. Always questioning, always challenging. Very well. Let us see whose view is stronger. The optimism of survival or the weight of history." Before Mira could reply, a sudden chime filled the room. Both turned toward the display on Elian's desk. A red signal blinked urgently. He pressed a command, and a strange sound filled the chamber. A distorted voice speaking in an unknown language broken by static. It repeated again and again, a pattern of desperation. Mira's eyes widened. "That is a distress call," Elian nodded slowly. "From outside charted space, far beyond our borders." They listened as the signal continued, weak but persistent. The sound carried no translation, only the raw sense of urgency. Something or someone was calling for help across the void. Mira whispered, Another civilization. Elian's voice was quiet, but steady, perhaps on the edge of extinction. The two of them stood in silence, the signal echoing around them. The debate of survival was no longer just words in a lecture hall. It was a call from the stars, and it demanded an answer. The decision to follow the signal was not made lightly. The Academy's council debated for hours, but in the end, curiosity and duty overcame hesitation. A research vessel named Aurora's Path was prepared for the journey. Professor Elian was asked to lead, and much to his quiet surprise, Cadet Mira was assigned as part of the crew. The ship lifted from the docks of Orbital Academy Prime, its engines glowing as it cut across the stars. Mira stood at one of the observation decks, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. She had argued for truth in the classroom, but now she wondered what truth they would find out there. Elian joined her. He carried himself with calm dignity, though she noticed a trace of unease in his eyes. "You should be proud," he said softly. "Few cadets see deep space this early in their training." "I am not proud," Mira replied. "I am worried." That signal did not sound like strength. It sounded like the last breath of a dying world. Elian folded his hands behind his back. Perhaps it is a chance to witness survival, even in the darkest hour. Days passed as the Aurora's Path traveled beyond known borders. The further they went, the fewer stars showed in the maps. The crew worked with caution, scanning constantly for hazards. Mira spent long hours in the archives studying human history. She read of Earth's extinctions, of ancient empires that fell, of colonies lost to hunger or silence. Each file she opened deepened her conviction that survival was not the common story, but the rare one. Finally, the ship reached the source of the signal. Before them spun a planet shrouded in heavy clouds, its surface dimly visible beneath poisonous storms. Great scars ran across its continents, and vast stretches of desert swallowed once green lands. The sensors detected ruins of cities, towers broken in half, bridges collapsed, empty streets covered in dust. The crew grew silent as the ship descended into orbit. The planet had once been alive with voices, but now it whispered only with the wind. "Record everything," Elian ordered. "This world has much to teach us." Mira whispered almost to herself. "This is proof. They believed as you do, Professor, but look what became of them." A landing team was prepared. Mira joined against Elian's advice, insisting that a cadet's eyes might see what veterans missed. The ship's shuttle carried them down through the clouds, and the surface revealed itself in broken detail. Gray sky stretched overhead, the air thick with toxins. Their suits kept them safe, but even through the filters, Mira could sense the weight of the silence. They walked through a ruined city. Towering buildings leaned like broken teeth. Statues lay cracked in the streets, their faces eroded by years of storms. In one plaza, they found a mural half destroyed by fire. It showed the aliens, tall beings with wide eyes and graceful hands, once standing proudly in bright colors. Around them were painted stars and fields, symbols of life and harmony. Now the mural was blackened, and only fragments of joy remained. In a collapsed library, Mira found a working terminal powered by an ancient core. To her surprise, it still glowed weakly. She touched the screen, and images flashed, records of a civilization's final years. Their leaders had spoken with certainty that extinction could never reach them. Their cities were strong, their science advanced. But then came the storms, the poisoned waters, the endless conflicts over shrinking resources. Hope turned to denial, denial to desperation, and finally silence. Mira felt a chill even through her suit. She called Elian, and together they watched the recordings. The aliens' last messages were filled with disbelief. They had thought survival was guaranteed. They had believed, as Elian still did, that civilizations were like rivers that never dried. Elian's face was unreadable. They were unprepared. They were blind, Mira said firmly. Just like we are becoming. Professor, this is not the rare exception. This is the common end. Their debate was cut short by a sudden alarm from the shuttle. The ruins around them lit with faint blue lights. Hidden machines, long dormant, had awakened. Defense drones rose from the ground, their metal frames glowing. They hovered with silent menace, weapons activating. "Back to the shuttle," Elian shouted. The team ran through the broken streets as the drones fired beams of light that struck the ground behind them. Dust and stone flew into the air. Mira stumbled, but Elian pulled her forward. The crew reached the shuttle just as a drone fired at its hull. Shields flared, and the engines roared to life. The shuttle lifted, dodging blasts as it soared upward. Inside, Mira's heart pounded. Even their machines fight against nothing but ghosts. They are gone, Professor. Gone forever. Elian sat heavily in his seat, staring at the ruined city fading below. He said nothing for a long time. The ship broke through the clouds and returned to orbit where the Aurora's path waited. Back aboard, the crew was shaken but alive. They stored their recordings and samples, yet no one celebrated. Mira looked out the window at the dying world. She felt sorrow not only for the lost aliens but also for humanity. The warnings were written clearly in the ruins. Elian finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. We will present this to the Academy. They must decide how to respond. Perhaps your view and mine are not so far apart as I thought. Mira met his gaze. Professor, we cannot survive if we keep pretending we are different. This world was like ours once. They believed they were safe. So do we. He looked away, troubled. The stars outside seemed colder than before, as if watching silently. The Aurora's path turned, leaving the dying world behind, carrying both hope and fear back toward human space. The Aurora's path returned to Orbital Academy Prime after many weeks in deep space. The ship carried scars from the encounter with the alien drones, and the crew carried memories of a world that had died. When the vessel docked, a crowd gathered, eager to hear what knowledge had been brought back. Professor Elian and Cadet Mira walked side by side as they stepped into the council chamber. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with holographic displays showing stars, maps, and the history of humankind. At the center sat the Academy Council, a group of senior scholars and commanders who guarded the direction of humanity's future. Elian began the presentation. He showed images of the ruined cities, the cracked murals, the empty towers, and the last messages of the alien civilization. The chamber was silent as the recordings played. The voices of the aliens, though distorted and unfamiliar, carried a clear message of despair. Their final words echoed with fear that no one would ever hear them. This world, Elian said, was once alive with greatness. They believed extinction was far away, even impossible. Yet they stand now as shadows of what they once were. We must learn from their mistake. Mira then stepped forward, her voice steady but strong. The professor is right about one thing, this is a warning. But he's still too hopeful. Extinction is not rare. It is common. On Earth, most species that ever lived are gone. In space, many of our colonies have already been lost. And now we have proof that even advanced civilizations fall. The council members shifted uneasily. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned, but no one interrupted. Mira continued. If we believe survival is guaranteed, we will follow the same path as those we found. We must admit that we are fragile, that survival is not certain. Only then can we prepare. A long silence followed. Finally, one of the council members, an old woman with sharp eyes, spoke. Cadet Mira, you argue with conviction. Professor Elian, your words also hold weight. The truth may lie between you. Humanity has endured much, but we must never forget how easily we could fall. Debate filled the chamber for hours. Some scholars wanted to ignore the ruins, calling them a tragedy too distant to matter. Others demanded action, fearing the same fate for humanity. In the end, the council reached a decision. They would begin the Preservation Initiative, a plan to protect human knowledge and life from the risks of extinction. Archives would be built across the colonies. Seeds, DNA, and cultural records would be stored in hidden vaults. Fleets would be prepared to spread humanity farther, so no single disaster could end them. When the council declared this, murmurs of approval filled the room. Mira felt a weight lift from her heart. For the first time, she believed her voice had made a difference. Elian looked at her and gave a small nod. Though he still carried hope, he no longer denied the shadow of loss. In the following weeks, the Academy buzzed with energy. Cadets and scientists worked together to design the preservation vaults. Artists began recording music and stories to send across the stars. Farmers sent seeds, engineers offered blueprints, and children's laughter was captured so that even if lost, humanity's joy would remain. Mira spent her days helping organize records from Earth's history. She touched old files showing drawings of animals long extinct, creatures that would never return. It filled her with sadness but also with resolve. If humanity was to endure, it had to remember both its triumphs and its losses. One evening, she met Elian on the Academy's wide balcony. The stars stretched endlessly, and the glow of the preservation ships shone like fireflies leaving the docks. Elian stood quietly watching the ships prepare to scatter across the galaxy. You were right, Mira. he admitted softly. I spoke too strongly in defense of hope. Hope has value, but only when it is balanced with truth. Mira looked at him, surprised at the humility in his voice. And you were right too, Professor. Without hope, truth would be too heavy. If all we see is the shadow, we forget the light. Elian smiled faintly. Then perhaps our debate was never about who was correct, but about how both views must live together. Humanity must see the danger clearly, yet still choose to fight for survival. They stood in silence for a while, gazing at the stars. A preservation ship launched, its engines glowing bright as it vanished into the void. Mira thought of the alien world they had left behind, its ruins, its silence. She promised herself that humanity would not share that fate, not if she could help it. Days turned to weeks, and the initiative spread. Vaults were hidden under mountains, beneath oceans, and on distant moons. Great starships left carrying seeds of life, libraries of knowledge, and the dreams of millions. Humanity was still fragile, but it was no longer careless. Mira continued her training, no longer just a cadet who questioned her professor. She had become a voice that shaped the future. Elian continued to teach, but his lectures now carried a different tone. He still spoke of survival, but he also spoke of responsibility, of the price of denial, and of the strength of admitting fear. In their final conversation before Mira left on her first true mission, Elian said, "Remember this, Mira. Extinction may not be rare, but neither is the will to fight against it. That will is what makes us human." Mira nodded. "And I will carry that will wherever we go." The story ended not with despair nor with blind hope, but with balance. Humanity knew its fragility, but also its power. The stars were still filled with danger, but also with possibility. As long as even one spark of humanity endured, the light would not fade. And so when the next ship left the docks carrying life and memory into the dark, Mira stood tall among the crew. She was no longer just a cadet. She was part of humanity's answer to the silence of the stars. We are fragile, but we will not vanish without a fight.